Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Good morning. Well, if you haven't met me or seen me around, my name is David Buckley. I'm a ministerial intern here at First Unitarian Society. This is my first talk here, so you must be, thank you. I was going to say you must be either very brave or very gracious, but it sounds like very gracious here today. I want to say that more generally, I'm grateful for the opportunity to explore this role here, to learn from all of you, from our excellent ministers and staff. Even more, I'm grateful for the space that all of you create here for me, for each other, for visitors. A space of openness and support and accountability, but with mutual recognition that we are figuring out this one human life together. In that space that you provide, I feel safe enough to try out something new, even in my first talk here. What I want to do is share some of my background and the history that I'm bringing to this role, how that has shaped my still developing philosophy of community and ministry in a humanist context. And then I want to bring that perspective together with all of you to this theme of resistance. Does that sound good? Now, especially with this theme, I should start by placing myself in terms of privilege. As a straight, white, cis male who grew up in relative wealth and ease, if there's a theme of resistance in my story, it's more internal and figuring out how to be part of resistance to injustice in the broader effort to create a better world. I'll come back to that. But for now, let's look at how complex and challenging resistance can be. In his recent book, The Persuaders, Anand Giridharadas profiles an array of progressive activists, politicians, and others who have found ways to be both firm in their resistance to injustice, but also clear in their demands, but also persuasive, reaching out to expand their coalitions and to cooperate where they can on shared issues, sometimes even with those they disagree with on many other things. One of the most compelling voices Giridharadas lifts up is that of Loretta Ross, a pioneering activist, theorist in the Black radical feminist tradition and co-creator of the theory of reproductive justice. Ross affirms the increasing boldness of younger activists and progressives to call out injustice, but she reminds us all to consider also when to call others in, to confront them in a more personal and compassionate way for the sake of change. Excuse me. She has a whole framework for this based on our degree of shared worldview and the potential for cooperation. And that would be worth reviewing here, but I was struck by something else she said about making the decision to call others in. Giridharadas relates that the first thing many of Ross's students at Smith College wanted to know was, how do I reach out to relatives on the right? They wanted, she joked, calling in strategies for not blowing up the Thanksgiving dinner conversation. Oh, we know about that. She told them that before they worry about those they were trying to win over, they should look at themselves. She says, you have to be in a loving, healing space to call anybody in. You can't do it from anger because it's just going to end up badly. So you have to assess why you're doing it. What's your motivation? Are you trying to help this person learn, or are you actually trying to change them? Giridharadas ponders Ross's distinction between helping someone learn and trying to change them. But Ross makes clear that it has to do with whether we're actually trying to make the world safer or whether we're trying to make ourselves feel safer. She says, the movement is not therapy. It's not going to be your healing space. The job of social justice activism is to end oppression, not to make you feel safe, comfortable, or loved. You need to get that somewhere else, preferably in a therapy session. Which sounded kind of harsh to me. But Giridharadas, the author, continues saying that Ross partly blamed herself and her peers for what she sees in her particular context of reproductive justice. She says, I think as part of the movement to end violence against women, we made some overpromises. We told people, particularly rape survivors, that we could create safe spaces, when in fact all we can do is create spaces to be brave together. As I was thinking about these contrasts between social justice activism and healing spaces and brave spaces, I was realizing how much my perspective on community and social justice work remains shaped by my particular experience of a Christian community, even though I've been calling myself a humanist for over a decade. After college, I was still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. Apparently, I still am. I found my way to Washington, D.C. to do a year-long volunteer program with a community called Church of the Savior, which is actually a network of about a dozen small, independent, ecumenical congregations and about 40 or so nonprofit organizations based primarily in the Adams-Morgan neighborhood of D.C. The network and its practices served as a model for churches around the country who wanted to do effective service and social justice work, and I ended up staying there for about 8 years. The original Church of the Savior congregation was founded in the 1940s by a former paratroop chaplain after he returned from World War II. One of his insights from that experience was that in order to foster a deep sense of meaning and commitment that could stand up in the face of intense struggle, everyone in the community needed to feel they had a role in ministry, both within and beyond the community. In this effort, as the church grew, it divided into smaller congregations that were either lay-led or had part-time ministers. And there were two other distinctive features of these congregations that stood out as I was reflecting on my own journey with these ideas. First, within these small congregations, there were small groups called mission groups, which formed around a sense of calling or purpose that was shared by at least two members. Usually this was concerned for some kind of social justice issue or cause. And I think you guys have done some things with small groups here, right? At Church of the Savior, these groups were really the heart of community life, even more than the worship services. And the nonprofit organizations I mentioned had mostly evolved from the efforts of these small groups to do something about housing, jobs, racism, whatever issue they were concerned about. It was commonly observed that these highly committed, mutually supportive groups are what allowed the congregations to have an impact on their community that far exceeded what their membership numbers would predict. During my volunteer year and for a few years after, I worked at one of these nonprofits called Joseph's House, which is a home that was converted into a small hospice for men and women who had experienced homelessness. It's the front door there on the right. Joseph's House was founded in 1990 to serve men during the HIV/AIDS epidemic, but later served both men and women with terminal illnesses so they wouldn't have to die on the streets or more often in the hospital. As you may know, hospice work can be meaningful, but it also gets extremely difficult at times, especially among people who had experienced so much pain in their lives, violence, addiction, those things. And Joseph's House thoroughly applied another insight of Church of the Savior, reflected in the title of a book about that community's history, balancing the outward journey of service with the inward journey of supportive community and deep spiritual practice. Joseph's House drew especially on ideas shaped at Zen Hospice in San Francisco, which integrate mindfulness practices with care for the dying. One of our maxims there was welcome everything, push away nothing. When one of the residents, who was usually very friendly and charming, got upset because we were out of milk and gave me a shove, I admitted I didn't exactly welcome it. It was quite an argument. But afterward, to continue that work, I had to remember that the risk, at least the risk of those experiences, was inextricable from the work of providing that care. To sustain the outer journey, I had to be nurturing and sharing in the inner journey as well. That hospice work actually convinced me to become a nurse, which I went back to school for there in D.C. Meanwhile, I was involved with one of the small congregations that had grown out of Church of the Savior, so as was common there, I started to preach now and then. That's the inside of Church of the Savior on that previous slide there. And their assembly hall, as you saw, was a little smaller than this one. Along with my work as a nurse, I found preaching attempting to inspire and encourage myself and my community to be extremely rewarding, albeit challenging. And I thought, okay, I can see myself living this life, providing medical care to those in need and trying to encourage and support others doing this work together as a community. Excuse me. But as I got into preaching and started digging deeper into theology and then went to seminary, I kept finding that the deeper I dug, the more gaps I found in the foundation of my beliefs. I kept digging and digging until I realized there really was no more foundation, at least not in me. As lovely as that community and that way of life was in so many ways, it was no longer a fit. So anyway, I had to make some new plans. I knew I still wanted to help people, so I went on in my nursing career, became a nurse practitioner in psychiatry. Still now, the majority of my week consists of prescribing medications and doing psychotherapy. Back when I was pursuing my psychotherapy training and choosing an approach, I was drawn to acceptance and commitment therapy, which is referred to as ACT. Because like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which you may know and to which it's closely related, its effectiveness has a solid basis in clinical research. But ACT also felt familiar. Familiar because it integrates mindfulness, which I knew from experience to be a powerful tool in which, at least in ACT, has been extracted from its roots in Buddhist and Hindu meditation. In ACT, together with clients, we use mindfulness defined broadly to slow down, to become more aware of our experience, more aware of the internal patterns of feelings and thoughts and our learned responses to them. We seek to loosen the connections between inner experiences and outer behaviors by accepting what is or releasing rigid conceptions. And we try to find new actions more in line with our deeper values. This diagram, which may be hard to see, tries to summarize the acceptance and commitment therapy model. Of course, it's extremely oversimplified, but one way to sum it up is be present, open up, do what matters. As I was learning and utilizing ACT with my clients, I was also getting more and more involved and active in a humanist community there in Boston, where I was now living. Eventually, I stepped into a board role and started to help develop and run a fellowship program for college students interested in learning more about humanism. I also started exploring humanism in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, including at this community virtually during the pandemic. So I had this new context of communities gathered around shared values, discussing how to apply those values in our lives. I'm using this new set of practices with my clients: mindfulness, acceptance, values, action. A new way of conceiving and connecting the inner journey and the outward journey. Slowly, I start to feel a pull towards some kind of ministry work again, but from this new angle. Now, please don't get me wrong. As Ross insists, social justice work is not therapy, and community and congregational life are not therapy either. Some things are most appropriate for a therapy session. But as someone who practices therapy, I'm convinced that therapy cannot be the primary healing space that we look to. Even if there were enough therapists, which there aren't, our communities can, like this one, be another kind of healing space that supports both the inward journey and the outward journey. And we need these kinds of communities. As I discovered, there's an emerging effort referred to as pro-social, which seeks to utilize the ACT process of understanding our motivations and reshaping our actions, not just with individuals in therapy, but also together as groups, to enhance the group's cohesiveness, functioning, and effectiveness, balancing the needs of the individual with the needs of the whole. I'll just summarize a bit here. This model doesn't just come from psychology, but was actually inspired by ideas in evolutionary biology. David Sloan Wilson, one of the main developers of this approach, talks about the idea of major transitions in evolution, which certain conditions are met such that individual organisms stop competing and start to function together in a coordinated way, again, balancing the needs of individuals and the whole. He points out that we see this not only in genetic evolution, but more importantly in cultural evolution. For instance, as humans who used to live in small bands learn to cooperate at higher levels in towns, cities, states, and nations. Wilson sees a description of the necessary cultural conditions of higher-level human cooperation in the work of Elinor Ostrom, who in 2009 became the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in economics. Ostrom showed that communities across cultures and around the world could overcome individual incentives and effectively manage shared finite resources if they had developed certain cultural norms and agreements. For instance, a shared sense of identity and purpose, methods for shared decision-making, and so on. The bold hope of Wilson and pro-social is that as we understand and implement these principles more consistently in our groups and in our societies, we can move closer to a world that works for all. Which sounds a lot like humanism, right? Last year, as part of research for a humanist philosophy course, which David Breeden was teaching, I did an initial training in applying the pro-social process for groups. There's a lot more I could say about pro-social and how ACT fits into it. I will note there are already efforts underway to study and apply this approach in religious and congregational settings. But rather than batter you with too many more concepts right now, I want to switch gears and give a little sense of what this looks like in action. However, quick pitch for our noon programming. If you do want to hear more about pro-social, you can join me in the chalice room downstairs at that time. I'll share a 7-minute video about pro-social and say a few more words about why I find it interesting, and then we'll just open it up to discussion. So please do come if you have any interest. But right now, let's try to experience this a little bit more if we can. Pro-social is made for more of a dynamic group interaction. We're not really set up for discussion here, so nonetheless, I want to see if each of us could ask ourselves some hard questions. And I should make sure, is everyone okay with that? Do we feel safe enough here? Okay, all right. And actually, some of you have already been open and have tried this out in a sense. If you were looking at the Friday newsletters and saw a survey I sent out at the end of March, about 40 of you responded, and it was anonymous, so I don't know who, but whoever did, thank you for doing that. There was a lot of variety in the responses, so while it wasn't scientific, I'm hoping it's somewhat representative. Now, if you didn't take the survey, that's fine. I'm going to review the results now, and you can look along. Try to ask these questions of yourself with curiosity and see if you identify with some of the responses. With the help of Jay Elkerton, our internship committee chair, I grouped similar responses and then paraphrased them. First, I'm just going to show you what I saw. The first question, I think, maybe bounced out of order, was just asking about the setting. But then, the next 4 questions are inspired by a tool we use in ACT and pro-social. First, I asked, why is resistance important to you? We said, seeking justice, protecting autonomy and individual rights, improving lives, preventing harm, saving the environment, equality, hope, being active rather than passive, increasing awareness, authenticity, and even survival. Then I asked, what outward visible actions do you associate with appropriate and effective resistance? There we go. Resistance that's in line with what's important. We said dialogue, speaking up, standing up for self, others, oppressed groups, protests, demonstrations, education, voting, lobbying, political activism, donating, civil disobedience, practicing nonviolence, and having a unified, clear message. On the other hand, there we go, I asked, what feelings or thoughts could get in the way and make it harder to have appropriate and effective resistance? And the biggest one we said was fear. Fear of physical harm, fear of failure, fear of stigma, fear of rejection, retaliation, conflict, loss of freedom. We also said hatred, vengeance, despair, hopelessness, self-righteousness, bitterness, rigidity, confusion, bias, denial. Yeah, all these things can come up and get in the way. And then what does it look like when resistance is not appropriate or effective? We said inaction, giving up too easily, disorganization, having an unclear message, fracturing, infighting, violence, doing more harm than good, unintentionally empowering oppressors. I don't have a slide for this, but I also asked what it was like to answer these questions. And the biggest response I got was thought-provoking, which was great to hear. However, a few of you actually found it painful, including the feedback that asking the question, what resistance is appropriate, itself felt oppressive. And I appreciated that. I realized I felt called in by those responses. And yes, I agree there would be a better question or a better way to ask it. But I want to come back to a couple of feelings that we noted that get in the way, and a couple of the ways that can look when these feelings are in control. Let's see on the next slide there. Great, thank you. I don't know about you, but I certainly identify with these patterns. Self-righteousness leading to infighting, which I think reflects Ross's concerns about calling out potential allies with anger versus calling them in with love. I also identify with the experience of fear leading to inaction. Fear can protect us, but often it stifles us. It was hard for me to go back to Joseph's house in the same way after my conflict with the client. These feelings are human, right? So we could think about ways to hold our experiences of these feelings with awareness, with compassion, in such a way as to open up to see beyond our fear or bitterness, to consider our values, the things we said were most important. And again, some of those were seeking justice, improving lives, preventing harm, protecting autonomy and individual rights, equality, hope. It occurred to me that our responses resonate with our second aspiration, which we read when we lit the chalice. We aspire to make the change we need for a more just, compassionate, and peaceful world. And again, this would normally be done through more of a group interaction, but I wonder if just seeing our responses and reviewing our shared values, does that help to strengthen the sense of shared meaning and purpose that you have together with this community around you? If so, that's part of where we start in pro-social, which I'll say more about this afternoon, clarifying our shared identity and purpose. But for now, as individuals within this community, I want to ask, would you be more willing in the coming weeks to take some step, like the ones we said were consistent with those values? Here they are again. And take a look. Is there something you might try along these lines? Is there someone you might reach out to? Something you might sign up for? I'll note the Day of Reason breakfast at the Capitol this Wednesday morning if people are available. Now, if not, if you don't feel ready, that's okay. As Ross said, it's not going to work if we force ourselves to do something that we can't do with love, or I would say if we can't do it as an expression of our values. In that case, just keep noticing the feeling and the pattern. Let's keep coming back to these spaces where we can learn to be brave together.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.